Well, hello friends, Marcus D coming at you all with a new video I'm doing for the Great Questions group on this Saturday evening, July the 26th, 2025. And I decided that I wanted to do a quick follow-up message to that series that I just finished, three-part series on sword cards, because in the second video, I believe it was, I referred to somebody called A.W. Tozer. And I have also shared with you in those videos some of the challenges, some of the tests that I went through and how I use those cards. Well, this is kind of interesting because it sort of ties into both of these aspects. And I thought I'd take a few moments and just share it with you. I'm going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter since the last one was a little bit longer. But I think it will resonate with you all, and once again, help you maybe relate a little bit to take this portion of my story and apply it to your life and your journey. And I trust it will bless you and be an asset to you as well. Anyway, I mentioned to you that I used to, two different aspects, different phases of my personal Christian life. I've had different people that played primary roles in helping me out. And interestingly enough, they were mostly, as far as I can tell, exclusively people that I didn't know in person. And in this particular story, I want to refer to Charles Stanley, and I mentioned him in that second part of the video, because at this point in my walk, which would have been in the 90s, and it also happened to be right around the peak of my Amway career, that I had been, listening to him. I had a number of his tapes. I still do, actually. But I was kind of getting to the point where I was ready for something a little bit more, a little bit deeper. It's kind of interesting how that has been a theme on this journey that I've been on. And what I also used to do was I would take these trips at the end of summer. And I call them retreats, and then I started calling them advances. And, at first they were, kind of just a getaway, and then I'd reflect on the business in my life. But then they, little by little, grew into more and more of a spiritual pursuit. Because, I heard about successful people doing that, both, in the workaday world, but also in this spiritual context as well. And then ultimately I grew into a reality where I realized that, you can travel within no matter where you are. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But again, I used to, when I went on these trips, of course, at that point I was, and let me just say this to you too, as a little side note, when I first started, they were kind of like vacations, these trips I would go on. And, I'd be like, look, I'm on vacation, I'm kind of, taking a break from my normal routine, my work routine, my workout routine, whatever. And so, I'd kind of take a break from my spiritual routine. And, when I was, a baby Christian, the Lord kind of put up with that for a while. Okay, that's where you're at, Mark. But after a while, it's like, look, man, this isn't cool either, And it was really amazing how all of a sudden, the trips just, all kinds of things would start going haywire on the trips. And I started reflecting and thinking, well, wait a minute, he's my best friend. He's everything. It's in him as I started understanding this, it's in him that we live and move and have our being. And I'm like, why would I want to leave him behind, And so again, that developed, and I began to realize, no, I need to maintain my spiritual disciplines while I'm gone. And as a matter of fact, because I'm putting everything else on the back burner, maybe take a little more time. And so I bring my Bible, I bring my journal, and I always try to take some kind of a book with me. I took a book one time that Charles Stanley recommended, he referred to, called They Found the Secret. And it was all about these different, again, old saints that had found, how to trust the Lord to help them, what they called the abiding life, okay? Learning to trust God to work through you. And That's a cool topic, but not the theme of this particular one right now. But on this particular trip, I didn't have a book I felt led that I wanted to take. And what was kind of interesting was this was at the peak of my Amway career, and we still had things were getting automated, but not totally. And so we still had quite a bit of logistics. And I actually got to the point where because of the size of the business and because I could afford it, I hired this very competent, pleasant young lady by the name of Tammy, who was my administrative assistant. And she would take care of all the logistics for me. For running the business, and we would get these tool shipments that would come in, cassettes, but we'd also get these book shipments that would come in, and they would send us samples. Well, they sent us this one sample. Now, this was the summer of 1996, all right? And interestingly enough, I had booked a beach house at the Outer Banks. That's where I was going to go, and I always went what they used to call the second season. I always tried to go after Labor Day because I didn't want to deal with primetime beach stuff because of all the distractions and just all the girls and and the bikinis and and all that sort of stuff and just the crazy dynamics that were going on at times. Without me being I'll just leave it at that. Okay, I kind of referred to some of that stuff in the other one. I'd get pursued, and I'm like, ay. But anyway, and again, I mean, it wasn't completely distasteful. Okay, it was, but I knew, I couldn't go there. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was called to this higher standard, and I really wanted to, it was understanding more and more. I wanted to get to know this great God. Well, anyway, and I had to toe the line. It's either or, especially as we get down the trail. So anyway, they sent us a copy of this book. She says, she comes upstairs, she's got this book, and she says, Mark, as soon as I saw it, I thought it would be of particular interest to you. I mean, she wasn't always bringing the samples up. They'd be downstairs, hey, this is a few, and I'd check them. But she brought this one right upstairs to my office. I was up there, and it's called In Pursuit of God, and it's a biography on A.W. Tozer, all right? Well, what's interesting is the title totally intrigued me. I'm like, well, this is kind of interesting. But I was not really familiar with his name. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm like, that name sounds familiar. But I didn't want to, commit to taking the book until I knew that, he was somebody that, I was being led to, that God was actually doing this. Although I kind of thought this is kind of interesting that it showed up like this and, the title of it and everything else. Well, I mentioned to you that, I was kind of plugged into Charles Stanley's ministry at the time. I was trying to, support his ministry. I was supporting it. And so I get these little thank you notes. Well, this is interesting. This is August 19th, 1996. I get this thank you letter from Charles. Now, isn't this in Charles Stanley's ministry? Now listen to this. All right, short little letter here. There alone with a horror of a great darkness upon him, Abraham heard the voice of God and knew that he was a man marked for a divine favor. Thus wrote A.W. Tozer concerning Abraham's encounter alone with God on the night before he would sacrifice Isaac. All right, now that's, from the Old Testament. There's a lot that could be said about that. Abraham never did. God was testing him. But I was like, oh my gosh, okay. I mean, there's the confirmation. And I said, how significant is that it's actually a letter from Charles Stanley's ministry? And not only that, but just the theme of this little, 4 little tiny paragraph note here. Let me continue to just read the last little bit of this. Tozer goes on to recount how solitary individuals encountered God and were blessed by him. How lonely people have found their way to real intimacy with God. I knew a man of great spiritual stature who, in a crowd, seemed alone. He was not standoffish, not indifferent to others, but he did have a bearing that said he had been alone with God. Though perhaps not lonely, I pray God will lead you into a more and more intimate relationship with him. All right? And that's all it says. And I was like, well, wow. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, the confirmation of Tozer, and then of course talking about the single walk, all right, which I was kind of, I was like, okay, Lord, that was all kind of developing at that point in time. I was just a few years into that, where I'd kind of put the dating on the back burner, and I was trying to sort through all that, but it was really interesting, and so anyway, I grabbed this book. Now, what's interesting, and I'm going to refer to this at the end, I recently reread this book. Tozer's got 3 primary books, and subsequently I got all 3 of them. Interestingly enough, the other one is called The Pursuit of God, and then the other one used to be called The Divine Conquest, and now I think it's been renamed to The Pursuit of Man, because it's really, the first one is Our Pursuit of God, and the other one is God's Pursuit of Man. And then his third one is called Knowledge of the Holy, and it's on the divine attributes, and I've got all 3 of them. And there's other books that have been compiled by different people from his sermons, because he was a pastor. He was also a writer. He edited a magazine for the particular denomination that he was a part of for a long time. But a lot of his contemporaries, and again, I may have already mentioned this, but he passed away passed into glory, because he's certainly in glory now, in 1963, at 66 years old. I think about that when I was 3 years old in 1963. But anyway, he was also considered by many of his contemporaries as a modern day prophet. And he was also called, they have this term called a mystic, which in Christian terms just means somebody that, had this particular hunger to know God. And of course that intrigued me. And what and again, I recently reread this, and what's interesting is, gosh, I don't remember a whole lot of I've been doing that recently, going back and reading some books that I read a while ago. It's amazing how, I'm like, wow, I don't really remember a whole lot, and I think it's really just because of how much I've changed. But the thing that stood out to me in this book, that did stand out to me, were the prayers that were in it. I'd never heard prayers quite like that before. And, I was like, Lord, and, I'll just tell you a quick little side story on that. I remember years ago when I was a really baby Christian, just getting, where I was, going in the business, the Amway business. I had a team, pretty successful team. And we went down this one time to this kind of special training session that was offered by the top guy at the time. And during the break, one of the guys on my team said, who was actually older than me, but he said, look, there's a guy on my team, and I had just met him briefly. He goes, we're going to be back in the hotel room. We're going to do a little Bible study if you are interested. And I'm like, well, I'm up for that. Well, anyway, I remember going in there, and gosh, at that point in time, I was probably in my late 20s. And this kid was a year or two younger than me. And he sat in the corner with his little Bible on his lap, and he started kind of talking about stuff. And folks, at that point, I was blown away. I was like, dude, how do you know that stuff, And I remember going up to him and saying, I'm like, man, I was just so impressed. He goes, well, I've been a Christian for a little while, and I read the book, blah, blah. I said, man, if I could ever know the Bible half as much as you do, I would be thankful. And he starts laughing. He goes, man, he says, if you have that desire and you tell God that, you'll know it twice as good as I do. And I don't know whether I do, but I certainly know it a whole lot better than I ever have before. And I can't tell you how many people have come up and said the same thing to me over the years. And I've told them the exact same thing. Meaning that God knows our heart. All right? And when we say these things and we're sincere about them, he's up there listening. Okay? He's like, if you're, and you'll put your money where your mouth is, I'm going to help you. Well, it was the same thing then, okay, with this. I was like, wow. One of those spiritual disciplines, connection, is a prayer life, And look, it's really not that complicated. It's talking to this God. I mean, he knows our thoughts anyway. But there's still, I heard things that were different levels. And when I started reading these prayers, I mean, I was like, whoa. And that's the one thing that resonated with me, that I remembered, in the intervening years, 1996, that summer, until just this last year, I reread this, okay? And the one thing I always, when I thought about this book, was I thought, man, the prayers in there were amazing. And I'm going to read you one at the very end. But, okay, I have to tell you I don't think I mentioned it, but you saw the title, A.W. Tozer and a Beach Battle in 1996. So, okay, so let's talk about that part, all right? Because that's the title to this, obviously. So I have this beach house rented at the Outer Banks, myself. I'm going down there, all right? I always used to go on these things by myself. I've pretty much done everything by myself. I'm not really by myself, but I am by myself, okay? But, there's the trade-off type of a thing. So I go down there. All right, I got the book, I got my Bible, I got my journal, but I remember going to the beach, all right? And I got my little beach chair. And one afternoon, I used to like to go later in the afternoon, the sun's starting to go down. Folks, the beach was empty. There wasn't a soul on the beach. I put my little chair up, I got my book out, I start reading. Out of nowhere, I don't know where she came from. Next thing I know, I look up, and here is this bikini-clad babe right in front of me. And I'm like, part of me liked it, all right? But I'm like, where did you come from? And she's like, and obviously, okay, look, it is what it is. Obviously, she saw me from wherever, and what was I 36 at the time, whatever. Anyway, she comes over and, blah, 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 blah. And, it was quite obvious, even though I've got to admit, it's amazing how many times the Lord kind of kept me clueless. I wasn't too clueless, but I was sort of clueless. But here I am. I'm like, okay, and I said that in the last video. Here are the sword cards. Here's the stuff that the girl sent me. Here is this one. I'd never met her before, but she was, in the flesh. And here's, hey, well, Mark, how much, And so again, folks, and I think this was before the last major challenge that I talked about, and I don't remember. It was probably honestly before. I don't know if it was before the second one. Anyway, they got kind of all get mixed together, but it was another one of those battles, and I'm like, are you kidding me? But I had to choose. Yes, God's grace and the help. But I had to choose, and once again, it was tough because there I am, for a few days by myself. She's given me her number. I'm down here. I'm going to be here for a few days. Hey, give me a call. Let's, get together. She didn't, it wasn't like, oh, but I know. Okay, I know what, you can kind of get an idea. Well, thank goodness that was another one that I just, what did I want more? Well, I'm telling you, okay, God honors those choices. What I want now versus what I want most. All right? And it's just the most amazing thing because of how he will empower you and strengthen you, because of course he wants you to. And it's interesting. There's a lot that could be said about this. This little note too, about solitary individuals. I knew a man, but I'm going to read you this prayer. And this is actually out of that last book, Knowledge of the Holy. And I want to say this to you too. God is interested in our heart. Let me just read this to you first, all right? If I can read this to you here. Let me put my glasses on. New body, baby. I could probably read it without them, but it's a lot easier with them. O majesty unspeakable, my soul desires to behold thee. I cry out to thee from the dust. Folks, I've heard that said, we live in a realm, rust, dust, dirt, death, decay, disease, and disintegration because of the curse. And that's amazing. I've heard that, that term. Anyway, I don't want to comment. I'm compelled to comment, but I don't want to. I did, but that's the last time I'm going to. Okay, so let me just back up. O majesty unspeakable, my soul desires to behold thee. I cry to thee from the dust. Yet when I inquire after thy name, it is secret. Thou art hidden in the light which no man can approach unto. What thou art cannot be thought or uttered, for thy glory is ineffable. Still, prophet and psalmist, apostle and saint, have encouraged me to believe that I may in some measure know thee. Therefore I pray, whatever of thyself thou hast been pleased to disclose. Help me to search out as treasure more precious than rubies or the merchandise of fine gold. For with thee shall I live when the stars of the twilight are no more, and the heavens have vanished away, and only thou remainest. Amen. And folks, I'm telling you, I'd never heard stuff like that. Okay, and I'm like, man, I want to pray like that. I know, you know what? I don't want to. It's not about the words. It's not about. The eloquent. I don't have that kind of eloquence, but it's the heart. God knows our heart. He looks past all that. It's a heart. And I mentioned that to you before. This whole journey. I didn't start off trying to be a pastor. I'm not a pastor. I'm a person, that has wanted to get to know this great God. That's my ever since I was a kid. What's this life about? What is up with this life? It's a temporary deal, man. We're fragile. We're frail. It's uncertain. Tomorrow's not promised to us. It's riddled with inadequacies. Yes, there's beauty, but we've talked about that so many times. What is up with this deal? What are we here for? Those great questions. What is this life about? I wanted to know that. Once I knew there was a God, then he's the greatest reality there is. There's no other. And talks about what that prayer is. That's what that prayer discusses. And he's the purpose. And we've talked about that enough times. I'm not going to reiterate that. I don't need to. But I'm telling you, it's amazing how, what a change it has made. And, and again, he's not the only one. There's, he actually even recommends other people. And I've got quite a few different books. And of course, you stay in the book. Okay. I've mentioned to you too, I've got a series a book, 3-part series that was edited by Charles Spurgeon back on the Psalms. But he's got all these other guys at the end that he quotes. Some of these guys, Tozer quote, all old saints. It's the most amazing thing. I pull out the bibliography in those books. Of course, it was all written in 1850s. And all these people are all gone. This passing parade of humanity. But so many of them loved God. So in their lives, some of these guys' lives, when they lived, it was hard. They're some of them, some of them lived a long time, but a lot of them lived short lives. A lot shorter than mine, probably a lot shorter than some of, a lot of y'all that are listening to these. There are people that, didn't make it to 50, didn't make it to 40. Some of them didn't make it to 30, and they're in there. They've got stuff that they wrote about God, let alone some of the other ones. But again, it just reminds you of this passing parade of humanity. And we've got to have some, the heart's cry for something permanent, and a relational reality that's beyond anything we can have in this life. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you because it kind of ties in, the battles, but the desires. And since I mentioned Tozer, I figured, I would just kind of tell you that story because it was kind of an interesting story and how God used, again, the Charles Stanley's ministry to kind of promote this and the way the book just showed up and again, the prayers. So, I just wanted to take a few moments and share that story with you. And I trust it blesses you and is an encouragement to you. And look, this is not a vain thing we do. The scripture says pursuing this God. It's the most profitable thing we can possibly do with rewards unspeakable. And, folks, we're going to be so happy that we have. So, just like I said, wanted to share that with you. So Marcus D signing off until next time. I'm wishing you all a wonderful day and a prayer for your continued pursuit of developing as deep a relationship as you can with our great God before this brief life is over, folks. And which could be at any moment, not because of our personal demise. That's the case. But I'm telling you, I have never felt the way I feel right now about how quick the end of this age could be upon us. And I'll just say this in closing. Look, folks, he is not interested, and I'm sure I've said this before, maybe several times. It's worth repeating. He is not interested in our personal agendas. Okay? He's not interested in, hey, I want to be able to do this, or I want to see that, or hey, I want to check out my grandkids growing up, or I've got my bucket list going on over here, or this, or that, or that, or this. I was talking to some folks recently, and that they have a number of pets, and they love their pets, and they're like, man, if the rapture hits, what about our animals? And I remember I looked at them and I said, let me just ask you to consider, don't you think God knows that? Don't you think he knows you've got the, who do you think's sustaining their lives as well? He's got all of it under control. You know, sometimes I really, I don't know, man. I'm actually just thinking about this right now, you know, with some of our beloved pets. You know, I don't have time to develop that right now, okay? But, you know, there's going to be animals in heaven. God created animals, all right? Christ's going to come back on a horse, and we're going to be riding one with him. I tell people that don't like animals, I said, you better get used to it because you're going to be an animal lover. You're going to certainly be an equestrian when you come back riding a horse. And God made them all. And sometimes I wonder if they're going to be raptured out of here with us. You know, they were made subject to vanity not willingly, it says in Romans. But the reason they were is because God has promised to redeem them as well. They're groaning and travailing like we are now, and it's not their fault. You know? Boy, that's a whole other message, and I'll end up doing a long one here, which I don't want to do. So, but anyway, I'm like, God's got it all under control, and he's not interested. He's ready or not, boom, we're out of here. That's why the scripture reminds us over and over again, we need to be living looking. We need to be living with that great expectation. And you know what, folks? I'm going to tell you what. If we're not, or if we're reluctant, we don't have a deep enough relationship with this living God. We don't have a big enough grasp of what's coming. Because I'm telling you what, the clearer that becomes, the more we see all this down here as shadows and dust. We see all this as sandcastles, mud pies, little dust bunnies. It's wood, hand, stubble. It's all going to fade away. And yeah, I mean, one little glimpse of what this God is creating for us, and we're not even we're going to forget this, man. This is nonsense down here. But if we don't have our spiritual eyes developed, we can't see that. And then the only thing we see in front of us, and I'm talking to Christians now. I'm not talking about the lost people because they don't have the spiritual eyes to see that. We need the Holy Spirit inside of us to see that. And that Holy Spirit has got to have a body and a mind and a heart that's becoming more and more holy so he feels more comfortable, and then he reveals these things to us. But if we're lackadaisical and whatever, then he's like, fine, man, I ain't going to, I'm scrunched up in a corner over here, because everything else is, everything else in your life is grieving me, and it's, you're interested in the here and now, and you're not, I'm not going to be showing you a whole lot. That's the reality of it, folks. So anyway, I did some preambling there, but that's okay. Still way shorter than the last one. So I hope it blesses you. I know it will. It's not because of me. These are eternal truths. And like I said in the last message, I'm only doing this because I love my great God, and he's asked me to pass it on as much as I can, and I care about y'all. And I want you all as rich and as happy as you can be in eternity. Okay, in eternity. Because that's where it's going to last. So, all righty, guys. God bless you. Till next time, Marcus D. signing off. Bye-bye.